So it's been a couple weeks since we've been able to continue the message on sovereignty. Um, yeah, there's just been a lot of chaos in life. Uh, Basically, we're losing our place to live, and we're waiting on God to provide us a new place. It's a mess. Anyway, but today, God was just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing this message. So I'm gonna do it and share it, and then we'll see where we go from here. See, the thing about it was the last message, and again, I hope that it was clear, because it's not entirely a concept that's commonly discussed in the church, but it is the concept of sovereignty. And this is a message that God has had me discuss before, the idea of our individual sovereignty and the way that we are, in this world. We have significant say and personage, and in that, we craft our own world, in essence. And there's a disparity there, because we're all familiar with kind of the concept of echo chambers and things like that, especially in our culture, and with the advent of social media, where it's become a very highlighted thing. But the trouble with it is that as an issue here, is that it's really just emphasized something that has always existed. People have always created bubbles around themselves. A really fine illustration of this was when I went to church this past Tuesday, and I ended up opening up about my own history of Satanism, and I was specifically answering a question in the middle of church to this girl who had questions about the kind of how you do spiritual warfare. Very specific questions, and I answered her question by, highlighting the strategy that the enemy employs and why it looks the way it does, where that whole thing comes from. What seems like a godly thing because it's a common viewpoint and a common mentality is actually a lie that's been crafted by Satan and by his little crew here. And specifically what she was asking about was the pastor as the covering for the church. And, we'll discuss that at another time. Not tonight, though. But I got a full dose of that when she had more questions, and we talked after. And suddenly people started pouring over to us to interrupt our conversation and preach their own messages at us. Checking to make sure we were saved, and checking to make sure that we were asking how I got out of Satanism, and really just doing what they needed to do to make themselves feel comfortable again. And in that, they maintain their own comfort level, and in that they maintain that echo chamber that tells them that they're right about the things that they believe. I need you to understand something very clearly. You are not right about everything that you believe. And tonight, talking about love, you need to understand that there are aspects of love, especially with what God offers us, that you do not understand. You don't get it. Okay? That's not an attack. That's not an accusation. It's a statement of truth. This is coming from somebody who also does not understand everything about God's love. But I can tell you this. Our interpretation of love varies from culture to culture. It varies from society to society. It varies greatly between individuals. I want you to pause for a moment, and I want you to think about what love is. Maybe write it down. I want you to, in fact, let's do that. Pause the video and write down what love is. Okay? Just a definition, and don't pull up a dictionary, don't do anything, just what you believe it is. Okay? Go ahead. I'll wait. Now that you've done that, if you have, I presume you actually haven't, but whatever. You probably just let it play until I continue talking. The thing about it is that love, where it pertains to God, is a very, very unique and very powerful thing. In a lot of spiritual warfare, and the enemy has a tendency to prey on fear, because fear is it's an automatic response, right? Like, the emotions of fear come from the amygdala. It's a responsive part of your brain. It doesn't think, it acts. A lot of people refer to it as the reptilian brain or the primal brain. But it comes from a portion of your brain that's very much so reactionary. And that's where fear comes from. So the enemy specifically likes to target the part of your brain that's afraid, and to use fear as a tool in order to twist you and manipulate you and make you believe all kinds of things. And it seems right. And that's the frustrating thing about it, is like when you start getting into the realities of spiritual warfare and you start tearing into the deep aspects of what you believe as a person, you will find again and again and again that you are motivated by fear. And that's not something that's been crafted by God. That's something that's been crafted by Satan and by the world. Because in the world, you're told that everything is about survival. And so many of us, we have existed in lifestyles that have driven us to points of having to survive again and again and again. So many of us carry traumas and psychological disorders crafted by those things. Things like anxiety, things like depression, things like fits of rage. I can't think of the proper term for it, but it's that point where you just find yourself walking around angry all the time because there's so much bitterness in your heart. And you just want to fight everybody and everything because you're angry. And you might not be able, me saying that you're bitter might actually be insulting to you, because you say, I'm not bitter. But then why are you mad? What actually is it that fuels that anger? Well, it's because of what everyone did to me. What's bitterness? The point is that whatever it is that fuels you and drives you forward, there are so many things that we carry around that are created by our circumstances. And this is important, okay? I understand this facet. And I highlighted this in the message about sovereignty, and we will go over it again and again here because it's very important. It was I referenced the Star Trek thing. It was Deep Space Nine, about being about the way that human beings are creatures that exist in the present time, but we exist in the present, but we live in the past, and we let our past define our present. And this only comes with age. You understand that, right? When you were children, when you were 4 years old, you didn't have a past to lean on, to say, oh, well, this is how this should work. No, everything was a brand new experience. And it's only with age that you developed a past that you would lean on to try to inform your decisions about the future. You didn't, and as such, it's funny in a way because in a sense, we get lazy with age because we use our past to dictate our present. And rather than treating each new event as something new to be experienced and to act upon, instead, we look to our past and what we feel based on what we've lived up through, what we've had happen, and what this person reminds us of, or what the situation reminds us of, and we let that inform how we interact with it. This is why projection exists. and why we have to be so careful about stepping into new relationships, especially the way that, like, you'll find people who have a type. Well, it's because they have somebody that they're looking for. I mean, there's old jokes about how many people are looking for a lot of guys will pick girls that remind them of their mom. And they don't do it intentionally. Like, nobody goes around, no man that I know of, no male human being, I should say, that I know of, walks into a bar and says, which one is most like my mom? She's got the same hair. Yeah, you're coming home with me tonight. Nobody. But it's an anomalous aspect because we are drawn to what we understand, and our past is what we understand. And this is dangerous, especially when we talk about love. Especially when we talk about love. Because, see, you need to understand that love, again, as I said at the beginning, love has a great many different kinds of meanings. Maybe your interpretation of love is one of a deep care for somebody. It's this intense feeling that makes you want to be around them, makes you want to take care of them, makes you want to see them be just the best thing in the world. Maybe love for you is like a great infatuation where you see this person as just being like, godlike in their own way. And, not to deify them, but to simply say that, or to say that you deify them, but simply to say that they're just the most awe-inspiring thing, and you find yourself just lost in them. And you don't know what to do. Like, they're so incredible. They're so beautiful. There's so much value to this person, and you get caught up in them. And that's how you define your love for them. Or maybe your version of love, what you would say anyways, is one of, a commitment to another person. One that simply looks at them and says, you know what, I've made a commitment to this other person that I will care for them. I will love them. I will be there for them. Maybe commitment is your love language, as it were. And see, the thing about it is there are pieces of all of these that are true in terms of what love is, but none of them are the whole picture. And when we talk about God and God's love, which we're going to continually be talking about God and God's love, because that's what this message is about. In no way, shape, or form do any of those specific definitions qualify to express God's love. They all carry parts of it. He has that commitment. He has that infatuation to an extent. He has that care, that feeling. But there's also so much more. But the expression of that love is the most complicated part, because God's love is different. There are aspects of his love that we do not understand. If we live in the past, and we exist in the present, all that we have, we sit here, and everything going this way informs our decisions and our feelings about what's happening right now. Whereas with God, his existence expands over the entire scape of everything. And he's seeing it all. See, he's not caught right here. He's also seeing out here, and all the various possibilities that life is going to take. So when you ask for something, and maybe it's something that you really want, and he says no, and does not bless you as you try to acquire it, maybe that's because he's looking at everything over there and saying, that's not right for you. And see, the thing about it is for us, we get so angry about that. Because a lot of us, especially nowadays, our interpretation of loving another person is supporting them regardless. I mean, what is a ride or die aside from an enabler. We do not differentiate between enabling and loving. We think that if somebody tells us no when we want something, that they're hating us all of a sudden, or tells us they disagree with us, they hate us. And you can apply that as broadly as you want. I mean, there are people who might watch this video and be very mad because that's a triggering statement, because you probably had people in your life who questioned some of the decisions that you made, and it really hurt you. I'll give you an example, for one. Actually, we won't get into that. We'll move past that. But you carry on, and this hurts. It's a hurtful thing. Somebody really hurts you when they questioned you, when they told you no, when they stopped and said, I don't agree with you on the way that you want to live your life. But have you ever stopped to consider that maybe they were seeing things that you were not? And I know that I know that a lot of people would be very upset by that. But, for example, I remember this one, I guess I can share, when Heather and I first got married. Or not first got married, but we were first dating. And we took a trip up to Oregon City, and I met her parents. And she took me to this, to her first house in Oregon City. And she was telling me this story about this guy that she liked when she was 12. And they would send letters back and forth. And she told me about how mad she was at her dad over the fact that he happened to get a hold of one of those letters, and when he read it, what that boy was writing to her, he was just like, this is not happening anymore. And she was so mad at him over that. Even to this day, she was just like, that was so inappropriate and so on. And I was like, well, and I looked at her, I'm like, well, if you had a daughter, now think about whatever was being written on those. I can only guess, but I know how 12-year-olds can be when they're left alone without parental supervision, a pen, paper, and public school education, like what the kids teach each other. And I just asked her, I was like, if you had a daughter, would you want her to be reading or writing the things that were going back and forth, being passed back and forth? And she's like, well, no. And I was like, well, then would you stop it? And she's like, well, yeah. I'm like, weird. And she was like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't take his side. I'm like, I'm not taking his side. You are. And she's just like, okay, whatever. And this is a thing. We don't always value, as a result of the way that we believe love should be, we want pure support. We don't want anybody questioning us. We don't want anybody telling us no. We don't want anybody stopping us. We just want to do what we want to do and be left alone to do it. And as a result, we get ourselves into really bad situations. We're like dogs eating chocolate. We know it could be poisonous. We might die. We also might not. But you know what? We want it. And you know what? Anybody who tries to stop us is a jerk. And that's the thing, is that we don't know. We don't appreciate the danger. It just smells good. It tastes amazing. We don't understand that it could be poisonous. It could kill us. And this is our inherent problem, is that when somebody tries to take that thing away from us or tells us, I don't think this is a good idea, it almost feels like an assault. I remember another one. I had this friend when I worked at Winco, and she so she was inherently a very selfish person, and this is by her own admission. It's not something that I'm like, just, it's not a judgment on my part. She would say this. It was her own statement about herself. And at one point she was with her boyfriend at the time, and she got pregnant. Now, she decided she was going to abort the baby, and I begged her not to. I told her, I was like, look, I sat her down and I was like, look, I will take your baby. All I'm asking you to do is to carry it to term, and I will adopt the baby myself. And she was like, well, do you really think you're ready for that? I'm like, I don't know, probably not, but you know what? Between my family and myself, it's a better life for that child than to not have a life at all. Now, she went on to go ahead and have the abortion. She decided that that's what she wanted to do. Now, you can argue about choices and so on, but her reasoning, as she candidly told another friend, not me of course, she wouldn't give me any solid reasons for why. And we got into a fight, and we stopped talking to each other about it, because she decided that she was going to do it. She told me that I'm not going to carry the baby, I'm going to have the abortion. And I was like, that's not okay. I was like, fine, but understand me, you're killing a baby. This isn't a small thing. This isn't okay. You're a murderer. And you know, like, I hurt her when I said that. And I understand that. And you can say I was too judgmental and so on. And that's fine. I do agree that I was too harsh. But I also agree that, but I would also state, in all fairness, that what the real reason behind her aborting that baby was, it had nothing to do with the fear of not being able to take care of it or anything like that. It actually was because she didn't want stretch marks, and this was what she candidly told another friend of ours, who she was closer to than me. So, you know, this life got ended before it could begin, because of cosmetic reasons. And the reason why I was so adamant to her, even to the point of harshness, was because of this. I knew that this would hurt her. I knew that this would inhibit her, because she would always need to justify her actions for the rest of her life. And in that, she would make herself a worse person. It's like somebody intentionally stunting their own growth. You know, if the circumstance was different, if she was like a victim of some atrocity, something like that, then fine. You know, I wouldn't have been so harsh, of course. I might not have even broached the subject, if I'm honest, given my temperament at that time. But because it was an unknown for me, and then finding out just how, because it was an unknown, I knew there had to be something behind it that was selfish, that wasn't valuable. It wasn't worthy of the act involved. And as a result, I knew that she was going to hurt herself in that. And I didn't want her to do it. It wasn't just about the baby, it was about her as well. And I cared for this woman greatly. And I knew how she was. I knew how she thought. And I knew how, for anything that she would do in the future, she was going to have to justify this as a righteous cause for herself. And in that, you know, she would diminish herself by the fact that she had to be right about this. It's kind of like how many people will justify a bad argument or false information. And it's out of pride that they do it. Because even though they might know they're wrong, they might even candidly admit they were wrong. But when it's brought up, they have to beat their chest and stand like they have something to gain by being right about this. Because to be honest and be humble is to be wrong, and that's worse. That's worse than anything else in the world. That's worse than being a monster or a hypocrite. And in that, that's a point of stunted growth. It's almost like you put a little block in your ability to move laterally. You can't do it. You're stuck there. Until you can let that go and let that block go, you're always going to be right there. Whenever this subject comes up, you're always going to be right there. And I knew it. I saw it. I knew what she was going to do to herself. I tried to tell her. And now, to this day, she's still that person. Anytime that subject comes up, she goes right back to it. She just reverts to that same person. See, we need to understand that God's perspective exceeds our perspective, and sometimes our friends and family's perspective exceeds our perspective. And this is the problem with sovereignty, as it were, the pitfall of it. Like I said last time, there's a very real pitfall, and that is based on perception. And the truth of the matter is if your perception of love, if your experience of love has led you to conclude what it is, and if it's off, all you have is that. If your interpretation of love is literally always being allowed to do whatever you want by your friends and having them support you no matter what, and understand me very clearly the difference between support and enabling. Supporting you is being there to carry you after you screw up and hurt yourself, yes. But it's also being able to tell you you're going to screw up and hurt yourself if you do this, and to not have you explode like a moron on them. Like, if you act like a jackass to the people who are supporting you, and they walk and turn them away, and then get hurt for it, the problem is you, man. Okay? Nobody else. It's you. All you. You can look at them all you want, but as long as you're looking at them, you're not looking at yourself, and you're not solving the problem. Because the problem is you. But enabling is like a twisted form of support. And that's where they all just tell you how right and perfect you are all the time. And then they help you do whatever thing that you're going to do. They might go and gossip to their friends about how they think you're an idiot and you're going to hurt yourself. But they will not do it to your face. Instead, they'll help you do it. And then they'll stand by you and fight everybody with you about how you were right to do it, even though you're crippled from the neck down. You can't move anymore. You're eating through a tube. But you know what? You were right, man. You were living your best life. Yeah. That's not love. I'll tell you straightforward, enabling is not love. It's not crafted by love. It's not motivated by love. It's motivated by fear. I was a Satanist who was taught by demons how to manipulate people. I used to go out and do that stuff. You want to know one of the best strawman arguments in the world is to push people into enabling. Oh, so you're not supporting them? Do you hate them? So you look at somebody who's not supporting somebody else's self-destructive behavior, and you tell them, and you ask them the question, oh, does that mean that you don't care about them, about what they want? Well, of course I care about them. Then why aren't you helping them? This is what will make them happy. Well, because it's wrong. Because they're going to hurt themselves. But it's what they want. It's what matters to them. It's what they care about. You're making this about you. I'm not making this about me. No, you're making this about you and your judgments and what you want to do. Literally what I did to people. Literally stuff that I said to people to get them to help their friends hurt themselves. Like, you guys, it's so frustrating sometimes to work in ministry and to see the stuff that I've seen, to see it all being laid out and watching people on the tracks. And what's more is there are some of you who aren't in the church anymore. You've walked away from it, but you think you're free. You think it's different for you. And I just sit there and I'm baffled by it sometimes. And it kills me inside to watch it happen again and again and again as you sit there and you talk about what love is to you. And I just sit there and think, your interpretation of love is a twisted version of a peace that you understand and feel, but it's been taken by powers beyond you, by a history of life that you've lived, and it's been twisted. And now you've created your own cultural version of what this is, and you live by it. And you think, and then when you look to God, you expect him to match you. God will never do that. God will love you in his fashion. See, the one thing about sovereignty and where we struggle, there might be things where, like, we talked about with sovereignty about how, like, sometimes there are different rules for people. Like, when Paul talks about, like, I think it's in Romans 13 or 14. I think it's Romans 14, where he talks about, taking care of somebody who's sacrificed, where it talks about people who sacrifice food to idols. And yeah, there it is. Romans 14. He talks about people who feel that they can, how people who are weak in faith might feel that they can't eat everything, whereas those who are strong in their faith know that they can. And he goes on to talk about, like, people eating food sacrificed to idols, and followers of Jesus know that it doesn't matter. It's just food, because the idol doesn't have any power or authority, so it doesn't matter. Whereas people who are weaker in their faith might think, well, that's corrupted because it's been attached to that spirit, that entity. And Paul explains how it's important to take care of those who have weaker faith and to match them at that level and carry them forward. And as a result, there are different rules for people. So when we talk about sovereignty, there are people who have different rules. You might have one Christian who, can watch scary movies and it's okay. It doesn't hurt their faith. Whereas you might have another person who maybe has a history of, like, witchcraft or something like that. And God has specifically told them, you can't watch scary movies. And they have to abide by that. Or maybe they just feel it in their spirit. It's not even a God talk to them thing, but it's just they feel a conviction in their heart that they need to avoid this subject. And I'm using scary movies as an example because it's super soft. But that's always what these things are about, right? So you end up with this thing where there are different rules based on different people. Love doesn't work that way. When it comes to love, God wants you to understand His interpretation of love. He wants you to understand His love. He wants you to feel His love. And here's why. If demons utilize fear because of the strong emotional response that it creates, where you respond to it, it's innate, and it creates so much belief in you about the way that the world should be. God uses love because it's the same, but it's good. The love is the greatest, for lack of a better word, for lack of better phrasing, I should say, love is the greatest weapon that God has in the battle between Himself and Satan. It is the greatest tool in the belt of every believer of Jesus, because that incredible love that God gives is something that we can share in, and when we carry it and truly have it for the people around us, it's world-changing. And this is the problem with it, is that it's not open for interpretation because it has to be one thing. If my version of love is very, very harsh, okay, and understand that's totally another thing. I talked about enabling, but I didn't even get into the subject of the people who, their experience of love is very stern, very strict, and very hard. And they will look for churches that are very stern and very strict and very hard. And when they're met by God's love, sometimes they won't be able to take it because He tells me that I'm beautiful. That can't be God. God wouldn't call me beautiful. He says that I'm special, that I'm amazing. He says that I'm unique and that I carry a special place in His heart. That can't be God. I don't deserve that. So you're going to find a church that tells you you're scum. And you're going to live there, and that's going to be your body. Because that's the only kind of love that you're willing to accept, because the transformative love of God is repugnant to you. Because all that you understand is abuse. And as a result, you seek that out, and you'll find that. And suddenly you're in these staunch, foreboding, highly religious church cultures that just hurt you and tell you it's love, and you believe it because you probably had instances where you were either raised in such a church, or your parents were the kinds of people who would hurt you and tell you that they were doing it out of love. And I don't mean punishment in the sense of a slap on the backside when you've done something bad, or sending you to your room, different things like that. No, I'm talking about really, really dark, really bad stuff. And they would tell you that they loved you. And triggering as that may be to face it. Because you need to understand that, let me rephrase that, let God lead you into it when it's time. You will need to face it at some point. But the reason you will need to face it is so that you can be free of it. And you can be free of what pins you down and makes you seek out people and churches and bodies who are going to continue to hurt you. Because the sovereignty that you exist in is one that's very, very broken. And this is something that's common. And these are two very broad examples. There's a lot of in between them. Whether you're the enable, whether your version of love is enabling, or your version of love is abuse. there's a broad spectrum between that of a lot of different kinds of love. And God's not even in that reservation. Like, that spectrum exists in our experiences, and then God's love exists outside of that, because he's not beholden to those boundaries. There might be parts of his love scattered in between, but it's not either of those. See, he will love you. You want a true ride or die, then accept the Holy Spirit into your heart, and then let God transform your interpretation of love. You don't like compliments? Let him tell you how amazing. Let him tell you who you are. Because through his eyes, he will see you in a light that you might not be able to see yourself in. The trust that he puts in you, the value that he has for you. When he looks at you and sees his own son in your eyes and tells you that. When he shows up time and time again to let you know he's there and that he loves you. When he reveals himself to you, when you turn your back on him and he still includes you in things that he's doing. He might even just call you forward to rebuke the church when you're an atheist, because he wants you to do it, because they need to be humbled. He will include you because you're part of him. And walking away from that doesn't change that. See, it's his breath in our lungs. He breathed into Adam to give him life. You can argue about whatever kind of dust we're made of, but the breath in our lungs is not from anywhere other than God. He is breathed into us. He's in our DNA. That's the spark that makes us different from every other creature. Animals have intelligence, they have personalities, they have so many different things, but they don't have the spark that we have, that makes us so unique, so capable of love and compassion. I mean, we can look at the animal kingdom, and the irony is oftentimes we look at them and see the reflections of what we value in them. You know, we'll look at the altruism in a group of like Cape buffalo protecting their young. We'll look at how they're willing to put themselves in the line of danger to make sure their babies are safe. We'll look at hornbills adopting doing group parenting, where the entire like nesting area, they take care of each other's kids. You know, we might look at the way that albatross mate for life and take that as like an important thing, or redback salamanders and how they will occasionally mate for life, and think, wow, you know, there it is. We oftentimes look for the things that in the animal kingdom that we value because they matter to us, and we'll say, and it's weird because we're looking at the things that we see in them that remind us of us, and then tell other people, like, well, look, animals, let's be more like the animals. And it's really strange. See, we are the thing. We are the thing of value here. And that's not to say animals are not valuable. It simply is to say that we are significantly more so. We carry the light of God in us. We carry his breath. And in this place, we need to start moving away from our own perspective of love and start letting God reshape our understanding of what love is. And sometimes that looks like being told you're wrong. But understand that when you're being told you're wrong, it's because he loves you enough to not let you go out and wreck yourself. Sometimes it means having to accept that you are beautiful and wonderful and worthy of love, and that you're not worthy of being told that you're scum or that you're disgusting. But rather, you need to start embracing the parts of you that are unique and special, because he does. And sometimes you'll find yourself in deserts, in tests and trials, and sometimes God will step back and allow them to happen. And you might feel like Job, but the truth is that even with Job, there were things between him and God. A lot of people, I've been talking about this for years, but a lot of people, ever since Jesus showed it to me, but when a lot of people don't get past the first chapter of Job. They quote Job in chapter 1 when he loses everything, and he says things like, naked into this, I came into this world naked, and I'll leave this world naked. So he's okay with losing all of his material possessions, and everyone sits there and says he was so good, and God just did this thing. But when you get to the end of the book, like chapter 36, is when you get to the core of it, where Job expresses his frustrations about how much he misses the things that people used to do for him. He longs for the days when people used to give him the head of the table and stand up for him when he came through the doors of the city. You know where you find those same things being valued? Is in Matthew 23, when Jesus is criticizing the Pharisees. Why do you think when God shows up to Job, he shows up in the form of a storm and is so confrontational and tells Job to humble himself? Because Job had some really off stuff about him. He wasn't as good as we all make him out to be. He was pretty good. He was a good dude. He was very righteous. But he wasn't the man that we keep making him into. He wasn't the victim of God. Trying to prove something to Satan. Instead, he was tested, and it was found that there was something dark in his heart. And a lot of people, you might sit there and say, well, that seems like no big deal. He shouldn't have gone through all that. He didn't have to go through all that. It's what was necessary to help him see it. Do you know how many things, y'all sit there and you self-diagnose your mental disorders, but what do you think it takes to get you through those things? I have had God lead me out of depression. I've had God lead me out of so many different things. But the time it took, the deep stuff that he had to lead me into for me to be free of depression, I had to see things about myself. And not just depression, but the bitterness and the rage and the anger that was attached to it. The hatred that I had for people who had hurt me in the past. All of that had to be brought to the surface because I refused to see it. So he had to take me places. He had to show me things about myself. He had to show me dreams. He had to have people come up and tell me things about myself. In order for me to finally see it, I had to go through trials and hardships in order to finally stop looking at the people around me and see the problem was right here. So when you think about that when you're formulating your arguments about that, when I said earlier, you need to look at yourself, I say that from experience. As someone who's had to do exactly that. God's love is not like our love. It is better. But it is hard to understand when we live in the past and we let that influence our present. Because what we're looking for love to be real is stuff that we have been fed. I have quoted the verse starting in 1 John 4, I think it's 16, where John expresses the point that true love casts out all fear. Because fear has to do with punishment. So we should stand firm and even be excited on the day of judgment, knowing that where we're going. We should not have fear. So much of what you believe about love is dripping with fear. You think people enable each other because they love each other? No, enabling comes out of fear. Because at the root of it, the people who are enable because they're afraid of losing the people that they're enabling. The people who accept abuse as love. Most of these people, there are a lot of different facets to it, but one of the core ones is that they fear anything different because they've probably had any point in time where they've felt something good. It's probably been taken away from them or used to hurt them. So they fear feeling good because it can be taken away again, and that's so much worse. But see, when we come to God, when we receive Jesus, we receive a new kingdom, a new life, a new world, something to become a part of. Our sovereignty is meant to be laid down to receive a kingdom. And we will always maintain that sovereignty. We can always pick that back up. But the decision is, do we put this down at God's feet? Do we, as the kings and queens of this world, take our crown and lay it down at his feet and accept his sovereign rule? Do we let our kingdom become part of his kingdom? And in that, do we find ourselves accepting a new love, a new world, a new life that exists in the state, a new compassion, a new understanding, a new value for the life and the people around us? Like, I used to be the kind of person who would sit there and say people are a virus. We just destroy the environment. Blah, 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 blah. When Jesus changed those things about me, when I laid all that down to him, I started to see people as beautiful. Do I still think they're bad for the environment? No, actually I don't. I think that we have the capacity to change the environment. We are the only creatures on this planet who have the capacity to reverse everything that we're doing. We can destroy just as much as we can create. We have the capacity for so much more than we accept. And in that, we need to move out of the past and be in the present with God, leading us into places that are so much better, so much deeper, so much different. You're going to be a stronger person when you're not being enabled into suffering. You're going to be a happier person when you can accept love and be loved and know that you're loved, and healing comes in that. All those wounds, all those things that you're afraid of reliving, they get healed. Again, another thing I'm saying from experience. I can't lay out for you everything that God's love is because I'm still growing. But I can tell you what he gave me here to tell you. And what's more is I can tell you what he's asking you to lay down so that you can receive his love so that you can be loved in ways that you never have before. And you might have had a great family. You might have people cherish you. But even that pales in comparison to the love that God has. To truly be known for every bit of who you are, the good and the bad, and to be accepted and loved, takes us on a path of healing that extends far beyond anything that we can experience in this world. Because nothing in this world is perfect. Nothing. And even the best love still pales in comparison to what God will illustrate, to what God will give you, so to who God will be to you. But it's all about what we do. The cost of maintaining our sovereignty is that we create the rules for ourselves. And we're bad at that, because everything that we create is based off of what we've had happen before. You find yourself facing a new problem, and the best you've got is to look at your past and say, well, this is what I've done in the past. This is what I've experienced in the past, and that's why we end up marrying our moms. I did not. Thankfully, God stepped up and showed me who he wanted me to marry, which was a shock, mind you. But, it was something different. And I am very, very blessed by the wife that I have. Heather is amazing. And she's so far from anybody that I would have expected to be with. And I'm very happy for that. Because I always expected to marry a version of my mom and be miserable. Whatever the case, though, personal anecdotes aside, this just is what it is. Love in the kingdom of God is not subjective. It's not what you make it. God is love. And God will show you love that exceeds the boundaries of anything that you've had before. And that's what he wants to do. He's not going to be your parents. He's not going to be your abusive church leaders. He's not going to be your really cool youth pastor. He's not going to be your awesome parents. He's not going to be any of those things. He's going to be God. He's going to be unapologetically himself, and he's going to love you. And if you can accept that love, then you'll start loving other people and other things the way that he loves. And it's life-changing, but it changes the atmosphere around you. Your that bubble, that echo chamber of yours expands and pops, and you start seeing a world beyond yourself. And it's bright, and it's beautiful, and it's alive. And so are you. And that's what I got.